Welcome to the Battle of Benfleet, a ADLG Madaxeman battle report, which allows me to combine two of my favourite things, playing ADLG and, of course, Billy Bragg, the Bard of Barking and the penner of the fabulous A13 Trunk Road to the Sea version of Route 66, which covers the road from London to Southend and then further on to Shoebury-Ness. And if you go to Shoebury-Ness, there's a really big artillery barracks there that when they fire, actually it might be on Pitsea Island, when they fire them it makes all the china rattle in Clacton. But no, the A13 is the legendary trunk road from the east end of London down which all of the cabbies retire to then buy bungalows and set themselves up in 1950s rockabilly gear. And you can see here all the different places that it goes through: Pitsea, Thunderslear, Romney, rather near Basildon, Chalkley, Prittlewell. It all gets there to the incredible, engaging metropolis of Southend-upon-Sea, which, thanks to Colin, used to be in the West Country Cavernous relocation to deepest, darkest Essex, has become an epicentre of the world of toy soldiers, but actually one that had already existed for quite some time, with quite a staggeringly impressive war games club in Southend, which had completely passed me by. But the idea of the competition was the Battle of Benfleet, which for me was a great opportunity to use these geezers. So these are mostly, nearly all, two dragons figures, and I've had them for ages. I rebased them up during lockdown onto ADLG bases, tidied them up, did them on my new sort of basing format. Lots and lots of spearmen, and I've used them as Vikings. I've used the Ross version of them as well, but I really did want to use a Saxon army. But a Saxon army does get somewhat outclassed a lot of the time, being essentially spearmen and nothing else. So what I was hoping to do was find a competition that they would fit in, and Colin's Battle of Benfleet, the battle between the Vikings and the Saxons at Benfleet in Essex near Shoebury-Ness, probably fought actually on the White Line in the A13. This is the Wikipedia information about it. Gave me a great theme to turn out these Saxons and take them all the way down the trunk road to the sea to the glorious, glowing metropolis that is Southend-on-Sea. And it's a good staggering battle. It's really nice to have kind of a real tight focus for a competition, particularly on a one-day thing, and to get some of these different troop types out, which in ADLG terms, spearmen are sort of the vanilla baseline troop type, spearmen and swordsmen. The spearmen's special ability is their ability to resist cavalry charges, but clearly in a competition set in the Dark Ages, there ain't a lot in the way of cavalry that they're going to meet. So how did I actually put this army together? I got the brilliant general. I used all the command points on him, Ethelred, the leader, and he had a couple of heavy cavalry, elite. These are the nobles. There's 4 nobles in the list. I put 2 in this one, put them on horses. I got 6 select third, which is standard vanilla spearmen. There's a great third, a slightly subpar, more levied up spearman, mediocre. He's probably a reserve, sat behind the line. There's a couple of skirmishers standing in front of those spearmen to try and protect the spearmen from any opposing archery, so that they go into combat fully together. The second command, pretty similar, but you've got an included, you've got Billy Bragg as the general, ordinary included, in an armoured spearman, heavy spearman armour elite. He's got 4 select third, 2 either side of him, so that's a block of 5, just like the block of 6 in the top head of it. There's also a reserve mediocre spearman as the thing behind. A couple of levy who sit right at the back, cheering on by the chip shop in Southend as the levy supporting it, and the 2 skirmishers doing that same thing again. And then Wiggy on guitar, but also ordinary included general with heavy spearman armour, and another 4 select thirds, so it's another block of 5. And there you've got, working upwards, you've got 5 combat troops, then you've got another 5 combat troops, and then you've got another 8 combat troops. So you've got an 18 wide army there in terms of stuff that can fight, plus some reserves, plus some screening stuff in front of it. And that's covering, getting on for 2/3 of the ADLG battlefield. So what you're always trying to do is find some marshy areas, which is pretty easy in Essex, or possibly the mighty Thames itself, and fight with the Thames on one flank, narrow the table a bit, possibly a village. There's a lot of villages, there's a lot of railway stops on the railway, which I think is owned by the Italian Railways, which is a little bit weird. So just to anchor their flank and mean that they're fighting on an 18 wide frontage that gives nobody any chance to get around them, and forces anybody to go just into a straight up slugfest against a wall of spearmen who are all pretty kind of tough. but not particularly special unless it's cavalry fighting them. And their toughness just comes from having 4 hits and just being able to keep on fighting longer than some other people. And there they go. Some of these guys are, clearly Viking-esque, but what I did when I rebased them, because it was an old DBM army, I actually had so many of the damn things that I was able to put bases of spearmen, bases of swordsmen, bases of turned axemen together, and this was really concentrating as many of the spearmen. And my theory was to get them out, get them on the table, give them a go, get some of these colourful kind of Saxon Viking type shields into action, and see what happened with this uninspiring or pretty one-dimensional list, and see if they could actually do the business in 3 versions or 3 games in a day of the Battle of Benfleet, and just line up, advance forwards, waterway on one flank as many times as I could manage to roll up the terrain. And here is the waterway, here is the mighty Thames out into the area of kind of mud flats just over the steaming, glowing metropolis of the Fun Palace Beach Funfair in Essex, which in Southend, which when we went was obviously closed. It was kind of early April. The weather was a bit more like early February, unless it's possibly like that all the time. You can see an observation tower to look out over the mud flats to some of the oil refineries and docks and other bits and pieces in the mighty Thames. And you can just about see the pier there as well, actually. And we'll talk a bit more about the pier after this epic journey where we went by train. Rather than driving down the A13, we went by train, which was a little bit kind of weird because we left on a Friday evening and there was no one on the train at all, which was a little bit weird. Clearly everybody now goes, in fact, yeah, there's the pier. We can talk about how long that pier is in a second, but going to Southend on a Friday night from Liverpool Street Station should really be commuter central, sort of drunk city trader geezer boys going home after a couple of pints after work. But no, everybody clearly works from home, but strangely enough, even though they're working from home, nobody was taking advantage of this enormous pier, possibly the world's longest pier. But possibly what we actually needed to do was this 1940s-esque fortune teller that could have told us whether we were going to get good dice or not. But I think given that it didn't take contactless, clearly we're unable to use that. And you can see the great historic centre of Southend-on-Sea, ye olde chippy. It doesn't get more historic than that, especially not when it's got a Subway, a Baskin-Robbins and a Costa Coffee in it. That's all perfect. This is the town, the seafront, where fish and chips rule. Although it did appear that quite a number of the establishments were closed. It was either too early in the season, and we did manage to find somewhere to go in, the oldest chippy. Thank God it's Friday, and there it is. There's the cod. Although it might have been a haddock, might even have been a plaice actually, very difficult to tell, but when it's in batter like this, and you can see it glistening there, as I've already done the sophisticated West London thing of squeezing the lemon over it, and I've not actually managed to bury the chips in ketchup and salt and vinegar yet. They're hiding underneath it. And there's some kind of interesting brews in some of the pubs available that you can take there. A lot of heavy metal biker pubs. That's a whole different story. But the next morning we realised we'd missed out on going to Dr. Feelgood's diner and a diet of entirely made up, I'm sure, of milk and alcohol. For those of you who know the Canvey Island story of Dr. Feelgood. And yes, look, it was a glorious morning. It's much grimmer than the night before. There is that pier. You can get a train along it. It costs £7 to get to the end of it. You get there and you'd be able to see this from the other side, really. But those forbidding grey skies were there ready for the Battle of Benfleet to take place. So we meandered, tried to find a fry-up breakfast place. There it is, straight, yeah, enormous pier, longest in the world, with a train, £7 train. You get to a Jamie Oliver place. But no, this was the real metropolis. You can see there's 3 Greggs, I think, in this shot. Visit Southend for all the amazing attractions. There's art, there's culture, there's there's at least 3 Greggs and a couple of Costas in the high street as well, and what a pier to go to. But the real important thing was actually getting to the battle, and this was the battle. And you can see straight away I'm not actually using those figures that I've just shown you, and the reason is I actually put the wrong tin in. I was doing 2 competitions in quick succession. I packed up 2 different tins with the 2 different armies, and I picked the wrong one up. So I ended up with a load of samurai, which wasn't really right for the Battle of Benfleet. They weren't particularly involved in it in any meaningful way. So Colin, thank good old geezer that he is, especially Southend Diamond now, managed to cook up the army list I had from some sort of scratch Saxon, Viking, Norman-esque Dark Age figures, and there they are, all lined up as the enemy Vikings kind of come surging towards them. There's a waterway, there's a village, there's a bit of a field on the other side. I've kind of narrowed this as much as I can. There's it's not very original, the cavalry are down here, but we're doing the best that we can to execute a very, very uninspiring plan against an army that has a lot of stuff that is really, in theory, much, much better than everything that I've got. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, really, on this one, to see whether they can actually win the historical Battle of Benfleet just by the fact that they are in Southend and there's a historical precedent on the land, the battle mat on which they are currently fighting, to see how it's all going to work. And look at this. This is the bunker. This is the enormous games bunker for the Southend Games Club. Permanent structure, loads and loads of stuff, more terrain than you can shake a stick at. There's another separate room entirely, but back to the tabletop action, and you can see a little bit more. The Vikings are kind of coming forwards. My half-hearted skirmisher screen is just goading on, trying to pull the berserkers out of position, maybe inflict a couple of hits on the Vikings as they're coming in. I've got my cavalry here. There's some pointing over there. You've got some medium foot and some bowmen. That's possibly a target for the cavalry, but the rest of the army is probably better than mine, so that's not particularly great. But let's see what they can do. And if we can kind of get in front of those berserkers and tease them to charge, we can break up the Viking line a little, maybe create some overlaps. But otherwise, if it goes in as a straight fight with two solid lines, that's going to be rather tricky indeed. And here we are. The Vikings do appear to have lined up. There they are, all forged in battle guise, really well animated, ready to go. I've just about kind of extended past this village. If the Vikings come forward and attack, there's a chance of a little bit of threat there. There's some fisticuffs about to go on in the village. On the other side, you can see my skirmish have done incredibly well. They've landed a load of hits on the medium foot. That suddenly looks like a very, very weak part in the Viking line, and it's going to make it difficult for them to come forwards, especially with my cavalry threatening to burst through as well. There are some bowmen have kind of run into the field over there. I can't do anything about them. Mine is an army entirely bereft of medium foot troops to go into terrain, but then the rest of the Vikings are just kind of there. In the middle, we're still goading away at the berserkers, hurling sticks and rocks and archery at them, see if we can pull them out of position. But here you go. So those guys have had to hang back. The spearmen next to them have hung back as well. The bowmen are pushed up into the field. I'm actually pressing forwards here because there's an overlap. There's the line of the Vikings is no longer solid, so I can potentially get an overlap. And I think those three guys that we're facing are just normal swordsmen, so they're exactly the same in combat as my normal spearmen. Everything else is better than me. It's got armour, tiny cutting weapon, support, it's elite, whatever. But those guys, this is actually a weak spot which we've been trying to engineer. So piling over here, advance forward, mucking about with these Iron Age huts, which I've had, I think, since I was at college. You can see how wonderfully well painted they are, as they were back in the day before we invented dry brushing and contrast paints and inks. But here we are. The Saxons are really pushing up. They're heading as fast as they can for this sort of squishy bit. There's a couple of really good Vikings there that we don't want to take on. But if the cavalry can sort of scoot out, get into those bits, we can engage that bit, get an overlap as well. You've got some sort of potential. Keep the bowmen out of the way, but the bowmen are sort of out of the way anyway. This isn't so good, really. This is just a line of undamaged Vikings teeing themselves up to charge into a line of vaguely damaged Saxons. And the Vikings, you can just go all along the line, and every single one's got some sort of advantage over the Saxons that they're about to fight into. So what's going to happen then? So they crash in. I haven't quite got enough command pips and enough spare troops to do what I wanted, but so the cavalrymen move up and join in, create the overlap. I've got a spearman sacrificing himself to occupy the two good Vikings. I'm trying to push that other cavalryman through the gap into the injured medium foot swordsman, and I've thrown somebody else into a field to try and engage the bowmen to keep them busy. But here it's this two evens combats and one where I've got an advantage. But here you've got the quaking of the knees of the Saxons as the Vikings just get ready to charge in and be ready to attack, swing their axes, doing all that, and bosh, there it goes in. And yeah, that's quite a lot of hit markers, isn't it? 3s and 2s, that's terrible. They only take 4 hits, and people taking 3 at impact in the first round of combat is pretty bad. I've only done 2 victories there, 3 victories just. One where the overlap is, and 2 where the generals are. So Billy Bragg and Wiggy, they're doing all right. They're armoured, they're elite, they've done pretty well. Everybody else has been absolutely decimated, and to an extent, even this evens combat here, there's all of my units have taken hits, and the enemy's only taken 1. So this is an utter catastrophe. There isn't really any way. We've stacked the Fort Cortina somewhere near Pitsea, probably in a lay-by. Its big end has gone. It's all a catastrophe for the Saxons. And look, here's just a view of devastation from a different angle. You can see the much more animated, well tooled up, well armoured Vikings against the rather staid and vanilla Saxons. Over here, still going for it, still got an opportunity. The cavalryman bursts through, sees he can smash into those axemen at the back. They're already wounded. If they can break through there, that cavalry could cause a lot of trouble. We could start to do some damage. The other cavalry is just screening off the Vikings there. Looks like the bowmen have dispatched the spearmen who went into the woods against them. But over in the middle, you've just got some enormous gaps as the Saxon army is just evaporating completely. Not quite sure what the extra horseman is doing there, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. And it just looks like Billy and Wiggy are the only people still hanging on, but they are going to be utterly surrounded at some point fairly soon. And look, that horseman, that kind of rapier thrust into the soft underbelly of the Viking army, that's been repulsed, that's taken a hit as well. They've knocked a hole straight through that block of 3, about to chew forwards. The other guys are still struggling. They're in a lot of trouble as well. Those bowmen are going to come in. Even this bit where the weakest part of the Viking army, where my skirmish had done well, that's terrible. This bit is just all gone. It's just been swept from the field. It's blowing in the wind like chip papers along the beach, really. It's just absolutely shocking as the Vikings just surge forward. And here they're just coming forwards as well, still knocking holes, just pushing stuff through. My cavalry have still not broken through. They're taking a beating there. There's yet more Vikings coming up to support them, and this is just all going desperately wrong, really. Here it's just not a good look for anybody at all on the Saxon side, as the army is just utterly falling apart. And it looks very much like from this that somehow the Battle of Benfleet this time around has been lost, and the Saxons have suffered a stunning defeat at the hands of the Vikings in sunny Essex.